Well, welcome everyone to C4, and our first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Trent, could you put the flag up? Join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Pull up the agenda here, and let's do introductions. I see a couple new faces, so we'll start with on my screen here. Trent, introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Trent Wilson. I work at Clackamas County. I am your C4 administrator.
Okay. Mr. Gornick.
Paul Gornick from Oak Lodge Water Services.
Okay. Pamela Burback.
Pamela Burback, CPO, Boring.
Okay. Mayor Milch.
Michael Milch, Mayor of Gladstone.
All right. Mrs. Morrell.
Good evening, colleagues. Adam Marl, Oregon City Commissioner.
Mayor Fitzgerald.
Excuse me, Julie Fitzgerald, Mayor of Wilsonville. Hi, everybody.
Hello. Mr. Sarah.
You, sir. John Sarah, TriMet Government Affairs.
Okay. Mr. Hilliard.
Yes, Mark Hilliard, Hamlet of Beaver Creek, representing the hamlets.
Okay. Councilor Pratt.
Valerie Pratt, 12th City Council.
Okay. Mrs. French.
Sherry French, Clackamas River Water.
And Councilor Sherman.
Hello, everybody. Brett Sherman, City Councilor, City of Happy Valley. I'm also the co-chair of the C4 Metro Subcommittee.
Okay. Mayor Hodson.
I hope this is working, is it?
Yes, it is.
Great. Well, good evening. My name is Brian Hodson. I'm the mayor of the fine city of Canby.
Okay. Your audio is a little crackly and scratchy, but it's there.
Okay.
All right. Next on the agenda is housekeeping. We have the minutes for April 5th, 2024. Are there any edits, changes, suggestions to the minutes? If not, I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
Okay, it's moved by Councilor Sherman. Is there a second?
Second, Paul Gornick.
Okay, second by Mr. Gornick. Anyone opposed to the minutes, approving the minutes? All right. Or any abstentions from the minutes? The minutes are hereby approved. Great. Next on the list, the C4 retreat agenda, and I'm going to turn the C4 retreat working agenda and survey over to Trent. So Trent.
Thank you very much. We are very near to your C4 retreat, and thank you all for your feedback over the last couple of months to help build a little bit of direction into what we will be working on at the June retreat. A couple of orders of business. Number one, registration is open. And so hopefully each of you received an email from the C4 email, basically, that invites you to register. And what I would say is your entire council, if your city, is welcome to attend. It's not limited to C4 member and alternate. Your whole council can come. City manager can come, and staff people who are, near and dear to the topic have historically come as well. And so I want you guys to know this. I do not do the C4 work in a vacuum. I am a table setter, and we work with really all of your cities and staff from across our jurisdictions to bring you robust discussions, both at the C4 meetings and at the C4 retreat, but in particular at the C4 retreat, because that sometimes creates a lot of work, not only to present information, but then to deliver work later in the year. And so we can't do that alone at the county without your support. So it's helpful for us to bring in your city staff. It's helpful for us to bring in your whole council. That helps you come back to C4 at different tables. And so I'm sharing all this, number one, to give big kudos to your teams, because that really is what makes the C4, wheels move forward. So thank you. And really trying to emphasize the desire to open up the invitation to your council and to your staff who work on these topics. So it really is an open event. Our full board usually comes. That registration's building up right now, so the county is there as in full as it can be every year that we can try to do it. So really appreciate your time and attention. I know it's a weekend. I know it's, you know, an overnight. I know it's out on the mountain. But we're really grateful for the time and work that you put into it. So thank you. Before we go on anything else, thank you. Working agenda. We have a retreat format that we've been doing for a few years, maybe for as long as really I remember working at C4 or working on C4, where we have a half day on a Friday and then a half day on a Saturday. That gives you guys a chance to finish any work or finish your week or only take a half day off, get up to the mountain. We do a bunch of work, we have dinner, and then we wake up, we do a bunch of work and we go home. And so that's kind of how that format is always put together. And it's been very easy to just divide our work into two topics. And that's what you'll see in the agenda. There's a working agenda in your packet on page 6. And you'll see that day 1 is very heavy on transportation. And day 2 is heavy on this conversation around housing production and job growth or industry growth. And so this is a working agenda because we really are looking for your guidance to help put some final touches on this. You can also see that there are a couple of to be determines in here. So we're working with your staff and our staff and kind of waiting on some of your conversations here to tighten that up. So let me just share my screen so that you can see what I'm seeing and we can all see it together. Then we can hit a few questions. So here it comes. All right, so on day 1, we're going to be heavy into transportation, and we'll do our normal opening session around 1 o'clock. We'll have a few conversations on lessons learned, like what helped us be successful in the tolling conversation, letting you speak into that. On session 3, I don't have it here, but I don't want to make any promises I can't keep. I'm trying to get some special guests to come and do session 3 for us. So without promising too much, I won't say who it is, but if we can get them, I think that'll be really cool to open up the rest of the conversation. But the impetus for this discussion is really moving you towards how can this group, Clackamas County and our city partners and the county and our other stakeholders, how can we work together to find some consensus around getting ready for the 2025 transportation package? And you know this, y'all been working really hard on that tolling conversation. And when that governor's letter came out a couple of months ago, it said, pause that toll project on I-205 to give the 2025 legislature a chance to see if they can find other money. And so there is, as you know, a looming question that is, in summary, if not tolling, then what? To pay for that project. So just want to keep that out there in the air. That's not necessarily how we're going to frame this conversation, but it could, you know, be working around that information. So we are at the staff level feeling like what could potentially be successful here on day 1 is driving this group and working with this group towards creating a similar values and outcome or principles position that C4 could take up together, or our cities and counties and other partners could take up together, similar to what we did with the tolling values last year and how y'all worked to create that and found some uniformity, doing something similar here. And of course, I think there will need to be some conversations around, you know, what are some of those funding mechanisms? What do you need more information on? I don't know if we want to get to like, what do we have consensus on, but like there probably will be some of that conversation. But I think at the staff level, we're really working around the why do you want to support certain things before the what do you support, so that moves forward. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in just a minute. And then on day 2, we are moving in a direction for a conversation that C4 I think has really been itching to have, which is how does housing production work together in Clackamas County, and how does that tie in with job growth and industry growth and employment lands, and how does that inventory for housing and housing production play in with your economic development work and potential? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. But each of our agencies have been working on some of these things. I don't want to say in a silo, but a little independently of each other. And it's very common, I think, for us to show up in Salem and be surprised that the other person's in the hallway and say, oh, hey, what are you doing here? Well, I'm trying to get this money to on housing production. Oh, us too. Oh, darn. Now we're competing against each other. And really, could there have been some better coordination? And it's a conversation that really hasn't been had at C4. And it feels like a great place where a coordinated discussion around this broader state housing production discussion could happen. How does that play into employment growth and where jobs are cited and things like that? So there are some things that we still need to figure out in terms of making this a productive conversation. But this is how the results of your survey that you did a couple months ago with Brian produced this draft. And we are working with a lot of your staff to build this agenda as it is. And as always, we end the day on that Saturday with what are we going to work on for the next year, making sure that you have an hour for that, plenty of time to digest what you just worked on for the weekend and come back together and say, all right, you can't solve everything in a weekend. So what are we going to work on? How are we going to prioritize what we work on with all that information that we'll navigate through? So I just hit you with a lot, but that's the working agenda. And I wanted to share that with you and then stop talking so that y'all could use words to help influence whether this is the right path. If there's something that you want to see within one of those conversations, we can take that note and make this agenda something that you are going to want to come to the retreat and engage in and come out with something that you want to walk away with.
So, Mayor Fitzgerald,
no,
thank you.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna ask for all of you cities to chime in because some of this is a lot on the cities, Goal 10 and others. So I'd love to hear your input, everyone.
All right, well, I'll go just to try start out. I like the idea of collaborating because, for the reason that showing up and maybe inadvertently coming away with less than we could have isn't good. But if we're talking, maybe if we break the conversation down into, those are very different things: housing production, job growth, and industry. I realize you could have some people hired to build houses that might help with production, but I think that might be a little too complicated for one legislative session. And then with the housing production, I'm thinking about how we've done some things in the Metropolitan Mayors Consortium where we see what's going through the legislature. We find some pressure points that we think could advantage the city and the county, and then use our individual and collective resources to push on those. That's a thought I had.
Let me ask you this, Mayor. If you were to pick the top two or top one to keep on the agenda, what would it be?
The top two would definitely be housing production and industry.
Okay.
Because I think the cities are all so different. I think it'd be hard to find a common way to build job growth. And then of the two, housing production and industry, I'm gonna say, seems like we could maybe work on, defending some unfunded mandates in housing production, where we're being asked to do ADA. I'm just pulling some things out of the hat, some stormwater management and finding ways to build housing that has ADA accessible units, which is a great idea. It's just that it's very hard to do if you don't have any money to do it. So there might be some things there that we could grease the skids for all of the cities and unincorporated areas on housing production. And then as far as industry, I would be asking for infrastructure for getting industrial lands ready. And that way you're going to get job growth.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's a good start. Mr. Gornick.
I was just curious on the housing production. Are the various municipalities that have their own building authorities, are they all using similar language in their comp plans and zoning ordinances to meet the middle housing goals? Or is everybody going their own way and they have different things? Do we need to have a conversation about comparing how each municipality is handling that?
Who wants to reply to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've got some pretty specific guardrails around what you can and can't do going forward, but I think well, no, speaking from Happy Valley's perspective, we've tried to find ways to accomplish the goals while still kind of pushing back on some of the concepts. I mean, there are a lot of kind of heavy-handed requirements that don't necessarily apply in a one-size-fits-all manner. So I think it is possible that there are some opportunities for information sharing. I think where that would be a little difficult is, speaking as an elected who really has no information whatsoever, and I rely on staff for everything. They would be the ones that would be much better positioned. It'd be like Michael Walter out of Happy Valley that would really know the details of kind of how those pieces fit together. And so I'm a little afraid that I wouldn't be able to do it justice, or even in making the comparisons to understand that. But I think if we had staff prepare information, that might be something that Trent, of course, being the smartest guy in the room, could put together and kind of glean the commonalities and the contrasts as well. So I think that's a reasonable idea.
I come from this from the point of if there's different municipalities are going different ways, are they opening themselves up to some sort of liability from the state enforcing the way they think it should be enforced?
Yeah, that's what we have attorneys for, to say, here's a way that you can do this, and here's how the language is written, and given how it's written, you may be able to do this thing and not have to enforce this piece of it. I mean, I think, whether it's like the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking, or some of the other language that's in there, it does things like limit the amount of parking requirements you can have, and in some cases it eliminates the need or the requirement to have patios and decks and common spaces, and so I think that there are some things that we've pushed back on a little bit, but that's again, that's way above my pay grade from the standpoint of assessing liabilities too. But I think it's a good conversation, Paul. Thank you.
Yep. And Brett, you had your hand up for your own comments on the agenda.
I did. I think what I would be curious about is, I really do. One of the things I found in attending a number of meetings, either metro meetings or just the various presentations we get on housing needs around the region, on kind of the production goals, whether they be the production goals out of Salem or at the broader level. What I'm finding, we just had this occur at the MPAC meeting, the numbers aren't matching up. The requirement of how many units are going to be built for how many unhoused individuals, and like the unhoused individuals matches the number of units they say need to be built for unhoused individuals. And we're talking about, it seems like the numbers don't make total sense. And when you combine the governor's goal of 36,000 units a year versus what the metro urban growth boundary is capable of handling, the disconnect that I have, and what I'd be really curious about, and I don't know if the retreat would be the right forum for this. I want somebody from the state who's in a decision-making position, I don't know if it's the DLCD or who it would be, to come in and say, here are the things we're looking to accomplish. Here's how they make sense. Here's what the things that we actually need to do. And really the bigger picture question that I always want to have answered, housing production is in the private realm. It's market driven. So how are we held to account for production at a certain level if the market doesn't support that level of production? And so I'm just trying to I'd love to be able to get a handle on all the disparate information that's out there and try to find a better, more precise path. May not be a path that I like ultimately, but at least I want to have consistent information. So that's one thing I think on the housing side that I think would be, really intriguing. If we do, I mean, if we can get some solid guest that is able to present something like that to us. And I think similarly on the transportation side, same kind of thing. For me, it's all about understanding the data. What are the numbers? Where are you getting them from? Do they make sense? Not even whether I agree or disagree, but it always seems like things are so fungible that we're trying to operate in a really dynamic system, which I guess is the nature of what we do. But the system seems very fluid at times, and it changes the conclusions that we have to draw from it. So that would be kind of my thing, is any presentations that we can get that has an expert that can come in and really hone in on the details we're trying to assess. I'd find that really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Sherman. You remind me that through the years, at least that I've been around on this topic, Goal 10 is this very broad, of the 19 state planning goals. Goal 10 is this very broad directive that, so to speak, puts the responsibility of meeting the housing goal in the cities more so than any other jurisdiction. Then you have, the governor's policies, and then you have the state land use issues. And then on top of that, whatever the state legislature does, which becomes law, as far as either incentives or requirements or cutting back on parking and all these other things. We are in this, it's so complex. We could spend 4 hours just talking about how that conflicts with some of the city charters, about that independence, how I want my city to grow. So somehow, Trent, I think one thing I think we need to figure out is, I think Councilor Sherman has a good idea in the sense that we need an expert there on this topic. At the same token, I think we need some guidance to make sure that we don't wander into answering some of the, or maybe it's best off to maybe think about having a little bit of intro into the topic of housing, so that everyone has a primer before we get there, or a primer at the very beginning to just lay the groundwork so we can keep everything on task. That's just an observation I'm already making. Mayor Hodson, you're up next. Co-chair Mayor Hodson.
I apologize if this is coming across scratchy. So hopefully we're okay. So I kind of want to build up Councilor Sherman's comments as well as Mayor Fitzgerald. I think, yes, when we talk about housing production and employment growth throughout the county, it is a very diverse and very, there's a lot of differences between each city and each community. However, I do believe that there is a number of pieces within each of those that we all struggle to get a hold of and get a grasp of, in terms of either understanding or being able to be productive in employment land or employment growth, as well as housing production. And so I think the idea perhaps of getting, what are those commonalities? What are those top 5 commonalities within each of those areas that we can actually coalesce around and be able to go to the legislature as a single voice on those, 3, 4, 5 concerted issues that we are having. I think it was Councilor Sherman brought up infrastructure. Okay, so that's something that's hindering a majority of the cities within Clackamas County. Then how do we rally around that issue as the cities of Clackamas County to get the legislature to hear and move? So that was kind of my thoughts on the TBDs and within each of those.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Pratt.
My concern, I guess, is more on the second day with the time, because you've got 45 minutes for housing production and then 45 minutes for employment growth. And to do a presentation, and from my experience, this group, we like to ask questions and flesh out topics. So I think that's going to be really tough to do in 45 minutes for each topic.
I really appreciate these comments. I think as we've moved in this direction, again, building something that came out of a survey from a few weeks ago or a few months ago. I've looked at this conversation not as one where we're going to find a bunch of answers for at the retreat, but really as a first conversation that y'all have not had yet around these topics as a group. Y'all might have had it as your own city council, and maybe even my board has had that conversation to a degree in some of these avenues, but there hasn't been a group conversation of how do these things affect each of us? And we all border each other, right? We all have, you know, similar borders, but developer so-and-so and houseless person, you know, Jane, houseless person, they don't look at those borders the same way that we do, right? So like, how is there some fluid decision making or commonalities where the Mayor Hotz issues that we can work on together? And this really, I think I'm looking at as a first discussion to tee up other conversations, because I think that's where I would like this group to spend some retreat time to dive into, like, what are those things that are weighing on you? Whether it's those, we're getting inconsistent information. Okay, well, what's the information that we need consistent for? You know, what are those details that we really need to flesh out? And that might tell us who we need to come and present and what they need to come present on. You know, oh, okay, we have these tools to influence housing production. Are they the right tools? Are they tools that we're all using? Is nobody using these tools? Should there be a conversation about that at a future C4 meeting? And I think that's how I'm envisioning this conversation to start, you know, at that meeting. And we'll do a little bit of a presentation tonight to talk about like what the funding looks like to influence some of that, like how the state legislature is trying to fund in this direction a little bit. But it really is the first couple of conversations, and it's going to be, if you're open to it, a little messy these first couple times as y'all start to formulate, like, what is it you all really want to work on? When it comes to tolling, that's very clear. There's, you know, month to month, it changed every month, and there was something to talk about and update on. This is not as clear because we all have taken it from different approaches and haven't talked about it in the same way. And one way that we're going to help with that, and a little bit of a segue, and I see that hand, Mayor Hodson, is this survey that's in your packet. It will help inform how this discussion can unpack too. And I'm happy to jump into that after Mayor Hodson's question or comment.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thanks, Trent. I wasn't trying to cut you off. I was just curious because I think point about the timeline of the day. What does pushing our day to 2:30, 3 o'clock mean? Is that an added cost there at the conference rooms and whatnot that we're using? Is that an issue? And then I think your points are right on with some of these aspects of what are those challenges that are being had, and what I think the legislature has does a poor job of, when we look at housing production or even employment growth, they go, great, every wrench, and they give everyone the same size wrench. But I might need a smaller wrench than what Julie needs in Wilsonville. And so I think that presents challenges across the county, and as well as across the state. So I think we can't be the only ones that are challenged by the legislature giving everyone the same size tool to get the job done for housing or employment.
Well, on the question of, do you want to go later or not, I'll leave that to you. But my experience has been that even the couple of times that we've scheduled the retreat to go past lunch, people still leave at lunch. It's June, it's Father's Day weekend. It's tough. It really is tough to kind of keep everybody around. And I think because this is a first conversation, there's not necessarily yet a clear thing that you're driving towards, much like, with the 2025 legislative session day, we're working towards what do we agree on as it relates to what the state legislature is going to start trying to produce. That's a very clear outcome. This is a first discussion, and I think trying to throw things on the wall to say, this is where we want to spend our energy over the next little bit of time, that's where we want to spend it. And there's so much to unpack. And to Mayor Fitzgerald's point, you guys might put everything on the wall and say, let's just wrap our hands around the housing production thing. Well, I don't know if we have capacity for the industrial or employment land piece. And I'm just saying that could be an outcome, not that will be the outcome. So y'all may look at it and say, this is where I think C4 could be effective. And that's always the question that I want to bring to you is when you want to have this conversation, what is our role? Because each city, right, you have your own planning team and they're great staff and they're working on, you know, in good directions. You don't necessarily need this conversation, but like where there is opportunities for coordination and uniformity, whether it's to participate in the region or to participate for our rural cities who are kind of in that unique land space within Oregon, because of just inherently being in Clackamas County, like there are things that y'all probably all do need to work on together. And this is the opportunity to do that and decide, okay, this is where we want to spend that energy or not. So to help with that, it's a good segue into the survey, which is a draft survey. It's in your packet. It's about 20 questions long, maybe a little less than that. And this policy staff team that we're working with on the backside of all this, we've put these questions together to help inform how these conversations could go. It's not perfect, let me say that. It's a start. If y'all agree with these questions, or if these are the right questions or not, we will we plan to send this to everybody who registers for the retreat. So what you will get is survey results at the retreat from people who are participating in the retreat. We've gone back and forth on who should get this survey. I've also had pretty strong requests to make sure that not just everybody who is attending the retreat, but also the city managers, so that there's a uniform answer across all the surveys as well, to try to get as robust of information from this survey as possible. So we've tried to break it down into these several topics to make sure that you're getting, number one, consistent answers. So you'll see that all of these are, I'm trying to not let y'all type things so that we're not getting a bunch of different types of words. I want y'all to click on the same button so I can put up a pie chart and show you this was the result, this was that result. Look where there's some commonality here. So we built it in that way so that we can quickly put it into a packet and show you this was the outcome of that discussion. How do you want to respond to that? So the first several are about the transportation package, so we can get some details on that. Really, they're high level. Some of them are around transit. We know that's been a hot topic for the last couple of months. Some of them are around what are some of your priorities? Because transportation funding at the state legislature, it's not just going to be around how do we fund 205. It's going to be around how do we fund ODOT's funding gap, which is also your funding gap because of how the state highway fund is put together. And is it a priority to keep that, you know, shared revenue source together? And if there's going to be new revenue sources, what are your values in that? So some questions to try to help get to that point. And I think you'll appreciate this. We toyed with putting into the survey or not a variety of funding tools that we thought, oh, it'd be interesting to know what do you support or what do you not support right now. But it's election season, and you know, these are public records, and I didn't want to have to put you guys in a spot to say like, oh, who supports that new tax measure over there? I know that can be tricky. So what we'll do is we'll take those funding tools, we'll still put them on sticky notes on the wall, and we'll give you dots so they'll be totally anonymous. It'll be a first conversation on that, but it'll help us find where is there starting to be a little bit of alignment, because not that you do or don't support it, but if the state legislature is going to do it, where is there some uniformity, right? So we'll work on that. And again, I just want to emphasize the transportation discussion. We really want to focus at the retreat on why we want to support something, not what do we support. And tolling is a good example, I think, of what we just experienced. In and of itself, tolling is not a bad funding tool. It's pretty fair. If you use this road, you pay for this road. I mean, it's at its core principle, that feels very fair, right? It was about how it was implemented, how it was discussed, where it was located, how it was going to impact your communities. And I think where y'all were successful was to not say tolling good, tolling bad. It was this toll project is being delivered in a way that's not working for our communities, right? And I think you could just put a bunch of dots next to, and I'm going to make something up, vehicle registration fees or road user charge, and that may look great. And then you support that funding tool, but then it's implemented in a poor way. So getting into the why and more than the what for now, as that thing gets built. And that way, as it continues to evolve during the legislative session, you have some principles to point to, say like, that's fine as long as it does A, B, and C. That'll put you in a much stronger position as a group, I think. If you agree, we can keep going, but that's what we'll be working on that first day. For the housing conversations, similar questions. You might not know all the answers to these as you fill it out. That's fine. Nothing's going to be perfect here, but it's going to give us some starting places to have conversations on. So is there a question missing from this survey that's in your packet? I'm happy to put on the share screen if you think that would be easier, but is there a question missing here? Or is there a question you think, Trent, that just probably should pull that one out. I don't think it's going to work for what we're trying to get to. But for the most part, it's just data that we can bring to the retreat. So I'm happy to field any questions about what's in there. If something needs to change, let me know. And if not, we'll launch it on Monday, and we'll make sure that if you've already registered, you get a link to it.
Okay. Mayor Hodson, can you take over? I'm having a technical issue I need to resolve, so I'm going to turn my screen off and try and fix or I might even, Trent, I might even sign off and sign back in, but take over, Mayor Hodson, if you would, please.
You got it. I will do the best I can, Bob. Big shoes to fill. Okay. So Trent, you asked a very important question about this kind of quote unquote kind of survey piece. Does anybody have any thoughts on the questions that are being asked and the tools that are listed in some of these questions? Trent, I think it's a very extensive list of being able to get an idea of things that are going on. So I like it. I think it's station and some idea pieces on my end. I don't know what everyone else is thinking. So I will. Any thoughts on making any changes, omissions, additions? Yes, Mayor Milch.
I've been reading some books about other state departments of transportation, and one of the things that was a stumbling block for a lot of them was they have responsibility for state highways, which are not freeways, but they are things like 82nd Avenue in Portland and 99E in Clackamas County. And one of the ways that they've met their funding gaps is by releasing their responsibility for those state highways and focusing primarily on the freeways. We don't have any discussion of that here, but I know it was important for the city of Portland to have some more, to have jurisdiction over 82nd Drive. And we've discussed that perhaps at some point, Clackamas County will want to do the same thing with 99E. Is there a way to add, I don't know how to phrase it, but among there are things that talk about transit in your community, local jurisdiction over state highways that go through our communities, whether that would be something that we could add to this list.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Ms. Burback.
I was wondering, do I present this survey as is to my CPO group? Or do I keep it more confidential?
You are in a unique position as a CPO representative and as an alternate, and same to you, Mr. Hilliard. Again, I'm sending this to the people who will be attending the retreat. So registration form to those people who come.
Okay. So if I could revise some questions, maybe to say this is what we're talking about. Does that make sense?
So look, this is not DHM. This will not be a scientific survey. I don't want to be DHM or play one on TV, but I would say do your best to represent your community.
Okay.
In your community, your representation at C4 is on behalf of CPOs.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't gonna. I didn't think it'd be a good idea to present the whole thing. All right. I got it.
All right. So outside of that comment by Mayor Milch, I'm hearing, generally speaking, this survey will get us to some probably healthy conversations. And I think that's the target. Awesome. So we'll get this drummed up into a survey monkey. We'll get it sent out to those people who have already registered, and then we'll open it up to people who register moving forward and ask that you try to complete it by, certain timelines so that we are able to put it into something helpful. Mayor Fitzgerald.
Thank you. I just had a technical question on one of the questions that is about the bottleneck projects. Can you define the difference between, is there a difference in this question between a bottleneck project and the 4 mega projects?
Fine if you want to think of them the same way, but generally speaking, I'm thinking that this is about House Bill 2017 and those projects that were named, specifically the I-205 project in the Rose Quarter, and Highway 217 was named in there too, but that got funded, so I don't think we're really thinking about that project in the same way anymore. Congratulations to them. So I think what we're trying to get to on this question is they're not gonna toll the Abernathy Bridge. Right now, they might toll it if no funding mechanism can be discovered to fulfill the funding needs for that project. So that's interesting. But then it's stuck on the Abernathy Bridge, right? We're just talking about how to solve the Abernathy Bridge problem. Is the bottleneck still a priority for this group? Yes or no?
Well, so I was noticing that it seemed, unless the Boone Bridge was added a little later, it is one of the mega projects. Is there a reason to not include that?
Can include it.
Because they're saying they're gonna replace it, and it's started out $500 million, now it's 700 million, so somebody's gonna have to find money somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mayor. I'm gonna jump in on this one only to mention that I've heard the chairs of the Joint Transportation Committee say that, their first role or job, or for the 2025 package is to fulfill the projects that were in 2017.
So just stopping there.
Yeah, and then I also heard the governor make references to that as well. But I also heard the governor say that the Rose Quarter project and I-5 bridge, I think, are a bigger priority for her than 205, but still HB 2017 only talks about the Rose Quarter and the 205 bottleneck, not the I-5 bridge. So there is a priority there. On that priority, I'm not sure which is which, but I do know, we all know that the recent IBR project came after HB 2017. So I'm not sure how they're going to reconcile that along with the Boone Bridge, right? Which came, I don't know when, compared to the IBR bridge.
I think it was
2001 during House Bill 3055.
Right, okay.
And so if we're looking at, if we're really talking about how, started with, are they gonna toll or not toll? But we still have the question of these bridges this list of projects has been identified as needing to be done. And so are they gonna emerge later in some other tolling project or what? Or do we just pretend they don't exist?
That's a good question. You've got, Senator Woods, who's in your area, who is on the Transportation Committee, and I'm not sure how they're gonna navigate that. But if we come up with VMT, for example, or they come up with VMT, for example, and they got a long-term plan to implement that, then I guess they'll have to do the phasing and the timing to say when. I don't think it's a matter of if the Boone Bridge is gonna
Right,
be
well,
done.
they've said it's gonna fall down,
Right.
so pretending is the only other option.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Canby Ferry. We'll just move it upriver.
Thank goodness the county hasn't mothballed that project at all.
How much does it cost to just get one more ferry? Maybe that's all we need.
Oh, my transportation department would love to hear you answer that question.
I mean, it's only costing the county like $600,000-700,000 a year. So, that's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah,
Was a proposed bridge.
Right, that's what I mean.
Bridge.
I think we've solved it right here.
Well, but I Mayor Fitzgerald, I think you bring up a good point, and I think looking at the survey here for everyone and having the conversation, and maybe that conversation within the two topics that with TBD's Trent and this group is maybe we rush out those areas that we need to maybe make part of our work plan gearing up to 2025 session.
And
Those categories. I don't know, but I think the survey definitely helps us create conversation at the retreat.
Absolutely.
All right, is there anything else on the retreat, Trent, that you need from us in that regard?
Not in that regard.
Okay. Does anybody have any other opinions, things about the retreat that you want to get on the table right now or forever hold peace?
I was just gonna say one more thing. I'm sure this will, I have faith that this will be a really effective retreat. But I just wanted to reinforce the importance of narrowing down the discussions so that we don't end up just sharing all of our many different issues and problems, and then it's almost over.
Agree, Julie. Thank you for that. Okay. Since we're all good and Trent has marching orders to tweak and fine tune, we're going to move on to the recent funding history for housing production and CHIPS. And
That's right. Welcome to the C4 retreat. This is another way of thinking about this. Trying to give you some information to think about over the next month to go into that housing and production day and why this conversation is so salient right now, which is that the legislature is trying to fund things in this direction. And there are disagreements, even in Salem, about how things are funded for housing production in particular. So I want to walk through a couple of those pieces. I want to give us some things to think about in terms of how is funding being produced, either in housing production or within the industry, and how can we come to the retreat and think about our goals and try to work together towards some of those goals, knowing that that's how they want to fund things, at least right now or until we learn something different. So this will be a very high level history of the last couple of years in terms of funding. And I think this gets us to that. All right, we all looking at the same thing here. Big screen of recent history of state funding. Yep, shaking our heads, great. So why are we talking about this? We know that there's growing interest in housing in Clackamas County. Several of our cities are normally in the top 5 to 10 of the fastest growing cities in the state of Oregon. Some of those cities have grown so quickly that their infrastructure has not kept up, and they have inherited housing moratoriums. They can't build anything else until they solve their water infrastructure. So housing and housing production and growth is a really big deal for us, and it's starting to get to a point where it's challenging to do it. Some cities can go faster than others. Some cities don't have that limitation. Other cities do. So we're all in different places. I think someone said that earlier. We know this too. Governor Kotek has a goal to add 36,000 new units every year. And I want to talk to you about the CHIPS Act funding reaction of why not us, or what's our role in some of this, and that will make sense when we start getting back into that conversation. So starting with housing, when Governor Kotek came into office, pretty quickly she issued Executive Order 2304. I want to focus on the bold section here. 36,000 additional housing units at all levels of affordability annually. So that's a pretty big goal, as Councilor Sherman was talking about earlier. How do you get there? What's our role? This silly title here is a way for us to think about this locally. 36,000, units a year divided by us. Like what's our role in this? And I've heard it framed this way. Okay, Clackamas County is 10% of Oregon's population. As Clackamas County as a group, is our role going to be 3,600 units of this larger target? Does that make sense? And I'm not saying that that's what we're going to be expected to do. I don't know if that's even possible. You don't know if it's possible. We know that there are limitations to doing it, but I think this broader question of what is our role within this 36,000 unit goal that the governor has. What's required? Whose job is it to meet the demand? Are there enough resources? Is there any interest in doing this, or is this just something we're being forced to do? Does the private industry want to do this? Do they have what they need? What are the hurdles for all that to happen? What is the methodology for how many units of housing each of our cities are going to have to apparently produce? So there are so many questions around this goal. To y'all's point, there's more information that's needed, but in some ways, I think that there are ways that we can work together to figure out how to get ahead of some of these, let's call them requirements for now, but expectations that are going to come our way. What can we do to get ahead of some of that? So one way that they're trying to do that is through money at the state legislature. In 2023, they pushed out $1 billion in housing, specific to housing. 20 million of it went to home ownership, 721 went to affordable housing, and homelessness got pretty close to $400 million. So that could really be unpacked in a much deeper way. Not really a lot of time for that. But the point is that they were trying to make pretty big investments into like the urgency problems of helping people find housing who are at the most need. And it seems like what we saw in the short session was this transition here in 2024 to push more towards, and y'all kind of describe it, these legislatively led land use laws. They're not local land use laws anymore. It's the legislature trying to legislate land use in order to move housing quicker. If you hear Salem generally talk about why isn't there more housing, you quickly hear that local government is a boogeyman, that the planning offices are gumming up the works. We all know that you're just implementing some of the rules of the state legislature, and it's complicated. And these are complicated land use laws. Oregon is unique in the United States in terms of how land use laws are put together. So it might be a little true, but it's not totally true. And to Mayor Fitzgerald's point, there's probably a lot of work that can be done to advocate on our own behalf about the value of local land use implementation and how to right size it to each of your needs. But what we saw there, though, was they're setting up new agencies to push this work forward. They're still trying to address housing and homelessness. Housing infrastructure is starting to get money, and we're going to spend more time on that. Healthy and safe homes, and then also like direct allocations to a few specific projects. So I want to spend some time on that housing infrastructure. There was a list by the League of Cities that I think most of you submitted projects into last year, and that list was over $1 billion of site-specific or locally needed infrastructure projects that would, air quotes here, help advance housing production. What the governor wanted to do about $200 or more million worth of infrastructure investments, and when the legislature got down to it and the budgets got tight, there was about a little over $100 million that went in that direction. So it was specific for housing infrastructure and production, and then there was a little bit more for land acquisition, which I think some of those work in the same ballpark, right? And the intent was to, I think, focus on non-transportation infrastructure. There's water needs out there. There's other utility needs that are like gas, electricity, that help influence growth in certain areas. And they really wanted us to try to justify that it was going to help with housing production. And we know that those intentions are pretty important to state legislators, but they're more important to the governor, because she pulled out several of the projects that were in that list and threatened to veto them because they were not site specific. They were more system specific. And actually one of our very own C4 membership agencies was on that short list, and that's the Oak Lodge. They have a water treatment need that was a compliance issue. I mean, they're looking for broader money, but they had a request in there that was for broader compliance. It wasn't to specifically build this property that was going to produce 10, 15, 20, 50 more units. It was, this will serve this area and it will help us stay in compliance. And someone else brought this up earlier. What's the role of a couple of years ago, House Bill 2001 and that middle housing rules that are coming at all of us? Clackamas County had to do all of that in that area that Oak Lodge served. And so trying to make sure that that information is available to the governor's office that this facility serves that area that has just done this thing in order to make it more dense. Like it is serving that housing production goal. So how can we use this information and this disagreement about this serves that or that serves this? How can we make that narrative a little bit more uniform? And that's I think a puzzle that this group will want to start thinking about. So what now what? Lingering questions. Will there be more money for housing production? I think we all know the answer is yes already. They didn't get out enough money that they wanted to get out. There are so many more projects ahead. And will you be ready to ask for it? Will this group be ready to ask for it? What will you be asking for? And is there some sort of uniformity around it? So can C4 be the group that enhances the support for those future requests? I see a couple hands going up. I'm just going to blitz through this and then I'm happy to take some questions. So what about industry? So similar but different. A couple of years ago, the feds pushed out the Chips for America Fund. It's a lot of money. And this is kind of a quick, very high level overview of it. But here's what happened in 2022 when that money passed. The Oregon senators acted very swiftly. They brought together a group in our region to try to figure out, of the task force, a semiconductor task force, how will we try to work together to spend this money in Oregon? I don't want to focus on who was in the task force. I want to focus on who was not in the task force, and that was anybody from Clackamas County. And our reaction to that was, well, why not us? Why weren't we invited? We're part of the region. And the answer was, number one, we don't have any CHIPS programs here. Number two, we don't have any community colleges that were focusing on CHIPS education. Mountain Hood Community College was doing some of that work, so they were invited to the table. All right, so there wasn't really a reason that we could justify as a group to latch on to why that money was being prioritized or why that task force was getting there. And I think there was a lingering question of, would that have been okay if we were focusing on something else? Like, let's say, yeah, it's true that Intel's not here or Nike's not here, but is there a broader conversation about what this Clackamas community of jurisdictions is working on in terms of economic development? Is it the medical industry? Is it more Bob's Red Mill type things? Is it agriculture? Is it food production and shipping? There's a lot of things it could be. Doesn't have to be anything, but there really wasn't an answer from any of us. We were kind of left scratching our head. Should we be at the table? Why not? The state legislature authorized over $200 million in incentives to move this forward. More of that money is also being pushed out here in the short session. Created zoning allowances specific to semiconductor industry. And a lot of that was because there was an industry that had already had conversations and were telling their story. And that's what we heard from Representative Janelle Bynum, who was the chair of that legislative task force when it got going. And she came to C4, remember? And we said, can you tell us any lessons that you learned from this process? And she said that same thing. She said, you got to do more work up front. You can't just, money can't just appear and then you got to say, I want some of it. You have to be ready for those moments when they arrive. So what work are you doing now to be ready for that when it arrives? And you need to identify like what your story is in that. She was very keen on doing some of that work to identify like what is your identity and how is that playing into the narrative of what's moving forward. And I think there's lessons to learn there, not just about the industry, but I think you could probably move those same lessons into the housing conversation and think about what is our story? What is our role in some of these things and put them into both conversations. So similarly, does Clackamas County have a story? Do we want to work to create one? Where does C4 come into this conversation? Is there a difference between this and the housing production conversation? That might have been something that one of you said earlier, I think I recall. So very high level. I wanted to just go through that quick money history, not to tie on anything, but to say these funding discussions are really why it's important to have that day 2 conversation at the retreat, because having some uniformity, having some cohesion and some story around what we're trying to do together, I think will really help this group made up of small, medium to small cities and a county. Not a lot of other counties are like us. And so if there can be uniformity in our work, I think that's going to put some of our communities or maybe even all of our communities in a better place to be successful when these money opportunities come down the pike. So wanted to share that and open this up for discussion, but that's really the preamble to go into the retreat. And I'm happy to take any questions.
And thank you for that. I really appreciate this, kind of down and dirty, slideshow to get us kind of thinking about where we're not even being considered. So, are there questions, comments, items for discussion? Mayor Fitzgerald, you had your hand up a little bit ago.
Thanks. I did want to, going back to the housing and the infrastructure and trying to figure out how to qualify for, you know, what might be put on the table in the future. And this is going to solutions, I know, but can we throw out the idea of going back to something that seemed to work pretty well during ARPA times, which is create a way to give a chunk of money to the cities to use where it works there for infrastructure. And there must be a way to create a filter, an application that cities could fill out to show that they're going to deliver, you know, like the water treatment plant that we just talked about, or the water plant. Because and find a way so that, can we develop a mechanism so that cities can be heard? Because we really didn't get heard in the last legislature.
Thank you, Julie. I agree with you. We did not get heard. And we keep continuing to have more and more imposed upon us and losing our autonomy to be able to make those decisions. Councilor Sherman.
I mean, I appreciate the conversation, and I think, you know, for me, a lot of the disconnect is the underlying infrastructure, the readiness isn't really there to host the next step. So we need to design the story prior to having the pieces in place. So I think to me, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. How do we as a county, how do we as a group of jurisdictions create a story? What is that story? And then kind of backfill with the requirements. And I'm not sure, you know, I don't know enough to even kind of think through what that story would look like. And so is it leveraging our local community colleges, you know, with the expertise to show kind of an educated workforce that we could then utilize to easily staff, you know, new locations that would occur? Is it access to freight facilities and rail facilities for the transportation of goods that would go into the things that we would produce potentially? Is it existing relationships at the county level with other countries that we can get resources from? You know, I'm not sure where what the components are and what pieces we already have that could kind of come in and become part of that story. So I don't know if that's even really a question, but just an observation. Thank you.
Can maybe try to help answer a little bit of that question with an example. Not that I have an answer to that for existing things, but you know, during the 2020 effort by Metro to produce that Metro Area Regional Fund program, you know, we were working pretty hard. Happy Valley was there at the table with us to try to advance funding for the Sunrise project. And not for the whole thing. We didn't have, I think, support for that, but just like helping to move it forward. And the challenge was for many, many years, the Sunrise project had just been this freeway extension, right? It just went from 122nd out to 172nd. That's how we talked about it. That's all that it was. It was the road to Damascus, sorry, which was another way of saying like it's the road to nowhere at the time, right? Because it was that city wasn't growing, or that city had just dissolved. So it was, you know, what is this road, and what, and at a time when roads are really having a hard time being politically viable, you know, for new lanes. So we paused and said, why is this not working? And it's because the Sunrise project really is like a 30-year-old vision, and that had never been updated. And so we spent a lot of time to like dial in and say, we probably should just check in with those businesses that are over there, with Happy Valley and Metro, and try to figure out like, what do we want this road to be now? And we're in the middle of that process right now. I have a visioning process. We got state legislative funding to like create a visioning program to figure out like, what are we trying to create here? And what will that be? And that's That's an example for that particular project, but I bet Oregon City has something similar. I bet Milwaukee has something similar, Wilsonville. And I bet some of those stories are even similar to kind of create like, are we just going to keep building neighborhoods so that people live in Clackamas County and work in other counties? Or is there some other desire to put more jobs in Clackamas County? Yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways it could go, but you're asking the right questions that I think will come up at the retreat that will then domino into future conversations.
Commissioner Saugus, Mayor Milk.
Yeah, I just want to say that at the Association of Counties, I sit in as often as I can on the Transportation and Economic Development Committee. And while the legislature's been tossing around these bills, the ones that interest the counties, we chime in on. And when the infrastructure funding was thrown out there, a lot of us said that it simply wasn't enough to go very far, just a sprinkling, a dusting, frankly, of a little bit of an idea that by the time you use the dollars statewide, there's just nothing really, there's just a little bit there. And the bigger the jurisdiction, or excuse me, the smaller the jurisdiction, the more difficult it is for them to take on substantial more housing or industry if they don't have the existing water plant or wastewater plant. And so the costs are just astronomical for a small community, and yet no means in which really, frankly, to fund the gap. So that's one place. So my question to you all, do you all sit in or have a similar committee on the League of Oregon Cities that where when these bills come up, you're looking at them, lobbying? Because it would seem that, especially with Goal 10 being a city responsibility, that you all would have a very powerful voice to say, you know what, why are we just dancing around these issues? The money out there is simply not enough. And then as far as economic development, at least for the period of time I've been around, obviously it's market driven, right? I think our job, if we do it well, is to provide all the infrastructure like roads, water, and sewer, and power, and all those things that would, make an industry move here, right? So we give urban renewal district for what Wilsonville did and what Canby did, for example. Those are things that make land ready, industry, can look at that and say, geez, okay, they've got that, or they have highway access or interstate access. Those are the things that usually trigger all of that. But again, it's market forces. And, as it was alluded to earlier, the state, for a long period of time, didn't seem very interested in roads. And yet that is a huge part of infrastructure that brings industry. And to contrast, really everyone in every county or every big county in the state, Washington County's got that MSTEP dollars. They've been investing in a lot of roads for industry and for housing and everything, and it's paying off. It's paying in dividends, and that's just a function we don't have or a resource we don't have. And no secret that they're constantly building roads. As a matter of fact, one of them is 124th is going into Wilsonville or is part of Wilsonville. So there's another example of just to keep constantly growing that industrial land for that base. It takes a lot of money, and the state's contribution is very little. Sorry for saying a lot, but just my observation and a question.
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
Sorry, I
Okay.
thought
No, you must have just, the audio must have gone out. I guess I get concerned about the emphasis on certain kinds of industries that seem to occupy huge amounts of land in proportion to the number of people they actually employ. And that's something that's happening with a lot of the tech industries and the Amazon warehouses with a lot of robotics inside and other things. So we seem to be happy about these new industries coming to our state. And in terms of all the CHIPS money, we want to be able to compete with, on a global scale with other countries. And so it's important to have them in this country rather than other places. But a lot of this problem goes back to, the zoning that cities and counties did 50 years ago. And Washington County was more heavily industrial, and Clackamas County, with our tree canopy and our beautiful rivers and everything else, we developed as housing and places for people to live, and all that develops a transportation issue, because if people are living in Clackamas County and driving to Washington County to work, then we got congestion on our freeways. So the interrelatedness of all these problems is there. I would love to see more economic development in Clackamas County of industries that occupy less land per job. And I don't know what those are necessarily. But I'm glad that our community colleges and our high schools and other education facilities are training people to have these great high-tech jobs of the future. But it's just concerning me that they won't be located here because of the huge need for land and extremely expensive parts and facilities that go along with all that production.
Thanks, Mayor Milch. I appreciate that. And your comments, those are good. Anyone else have any comment on this particular topic this evening? Julie, you looked like you were going to say something.
Well, I feel like I'm talking too much, but to Mayor Milch's point, I just want to reinforce agriculture. We have agriculture, and nobody else who lost it can get it back. And if we reinforce our agriculture, I just think let's not lose sight of that, because I feel like if we try to start creating some industry like that we haven't even heard of or something like that, who knows what we're chasing? We may not get anywhere. I think agriculture, isn't it figure I heard statewide, it's 13 or 15% of our gross financial, whatever it is, gross domestic product for Oregon. It's significant, even more for Clackamas County. And somebody mentioned early on the Bob's Red Mill, and I think Trent did. So if you think about, scaling up the vertical integration of from farming all the way up to marketing, what we could do. And I just hope we don't forget that.
I agree, Julie. It's hard. It really is. I mean, when you look, I'm just going to use Canby as an example. We've got sections of Canby that family-owned farms. They're on a fourth generation of farmers, and they're looking at their fifth generation, and they're like, "Ooh, farming. Ooh, yeah, that's hard work. I don't know if I want to do that." And so all of a sudden, it switches the conversation to, does that land become housing, or does it get turned over to big ag? So that's what we're facing here, at least in our part of our little slice of heaven in Clackamas County. So it is. The agriculture piece is increasingly be a challenge. I mean, it's farmers are moving further and further out to try to get the land that they need to be able to grow the crops that they want to grow. So, Mayor Milch again. Yes, sir.
Just to follow up on that, the other thing is that it's not really our job to worry about the rest of the state on this issue, but there are a lot of agricultural products that get produced in some parts of the state and then shipped to the metro area for all their processing and turn it into products. And if somehow some of those industries applying those locally grown and locally produced things could happen at a closer level, then maybe there would be the need for some of those 36,000 housing units to be in these other counties in the central part of the state or the east part of the state, the southern part of the state where agriculture is still heavy. Same for the logging industry, a way to bring that back. I did the same calculation that Trent was talking about, with Gladstone. We make up about 1/36, I think, of 1/360th of the population of the state. So that would mean 100 new housing units per year for us if it was allocated on basis of population. But if it's based on allocation of land, square footage or acreage, we would only have to have one house per year to meet our share. But there's a lot of the rest of the state that could be putting in a whole lot more. Our own housing needs analysis put us at about 16 units a year, which I think is probably about right. And we're getting a lot of that with infill through middle missing housing now that we've changed those rules in our city. Yeah, they're complex issues. They're all interrelated. Transportation is a function of where products are produced and brought to the market. And again, all these things overlap tremendously. And trying to solve one problem gets you working on another one as well.
So, Mayor Milch, I appreciate you using that reference point in terms of doing the math of what it would mean for Gladstone, 100, and let's use the vernacular that Metro and the state is using, and that is 100 dwellings per year, not necessarily houses, dwellings. And so, in a situation with Gladstone, right, I think you look at a situation where it's about going vertical, not out. So for you to achieve 100 units dwellings a year, you're going vertical versus out, whereas other communities, maybe it's out. So Paul made a great point in the section, in the comment or the chat about agriculture. So yeah, the transportation piece is big, right? We've heard from businesses as far south as Medford and even into California that say that their biggest bottleneck or issue is getting through Portland and that piece. So yeah, I mean these are challenges that have not gone away and still continue. All right, anything else on the chips front conversation? Solutions from this conversation, or just more questions that we need to vet and poke at our legislators about?
All right, so this conversation, remember, this little presentation was not so much to have answers, but to sort of reintegrate ourselves to, like, there's money out there. How are the people who are being successful to get it? What are they doing to be successful? And that's what I wanted to try to bring this group towards, so that we can spend time at the retreat to see if those same things can be applied to how we work together as a coordinating committee, as a group of communities that work on it. That's why I wanted to bring this presentation to you early, so that we could buy a little bit of time at that very short retreat. Even though it'll be 2 half days, it'll still be very short, as y'all noted. So able to use a little bit of time tonight to get ahead of some of that.
All right. We'll move into updates and other business. So transit funding discussion status updates.
Okay, so we've had a couple of conversations at the last couple of C4 meetings about transit funding. Earlier in the year, the C4 table asked for more ideas on how STIF funding, the State Transportation Improvement Fund, can more adequately meet the needs and desires of the Clackamas County transit agencies and our communities that rely on transit. And we know that there's been annual conversations at C4 around having improved transit throughout our communities. So you asked us to ask our transit providers smaller transit providers to look at alternatives to the current STIF funding mechanism. And so what they were tasked with was, if the existing STIF funding was calculated in a very different way, what are some of those alternatives? And they presented, I think it was February, what some of those alternatives could have been. And then TriMet came last month, and they shared about the current formula and how that's all put together, and really wanted to highlight, and that there was some disagreement around the numbers. So when we did our math, it looked this way. When they did our math, it was different, and there was question marks around why aren't those numbers matching up? And it really was because they were asking different questions. And I just wanted to bring that to you because I didn't want there to be lingering confusion that their numbers, that someone said a wrong number or someone's math was bad. They were asking different questions and bringing different information to the table. And I think it's your job now, and we can talk about some of this at the retreat, trying to figure out how to incorporate it in a good way. Talk about how having these different concepts work towards the goals that you're trying to create. So we'll spend some time at the retreat hitting into some of those transit values, but I didn't want it to go too long where there had been this disagreement about whose math was which way. I wanted to just re-highlight that it really was different questions that were getting there, and there's more work to be done on it. And there will be more work that we will bring back to the retreat or to the C4 table.
Thanks, Trent. Appreciate that. JPAC update.
Sure. Looks like Mayor Buck's not here, nor is Counselor forgot her name.
Louis?
JPAC, we talked about the RFFA process. They are considering as debt is getting rolled off from the last round, how we want to prioritize or whether or not we want to bond for more transportation dollars. So that was a substantial discussion. More to come on that. We're submitting questions. You all have raised some good questions. We submitted those, waiting for some responses. And I think in a few months here, staff will be helping guide that, answer those questions, and we'll have more discussions to bring back to you. There was a presentation from the LOC and the AOC staff on some of our funding needs for cities and counties. That was pretty much it. Brett, did you watch that? Do you have anything to add? Did I cover it well?
No, I think you covered the high points. I think I was able to catch the beginning of that, and the UPWP update as well was a little part of that as well. But I think you covered kind of the main meat of it.
Right. So back to you, Mayor Hassan.
All right. Thank you, sir. MPAC update. Brett.
I can take that one. So at the last MPAC meeting, Chair Treese carved out some time to revisit the tip fee issue that we had been talking about previously. The tip fee is the charge for dropping waste at the centers, and so historically, from I think like 2020 to 2027. Metro had made a commitment to keep that fee with a target of like a 7 to 8% annual increase over a long period of time, with an 8% predictability fee cap. And of course, what happens is immediately they exceed that number, and it's run closer to 12%, with the latest observation being 11.92%. So we had been raising some questions and comments about that to better understand why. There was after last year's increase at a substantially above prediction level, Metro had created a task force to do like a fee policy review, which convened and did include some elected officials as part of that group. And ultimately, what happened though was that group reviewed policies, but not the actual fees themselves. So they made kind of like policy prioritizations in a vacuum without knowing the impact of those decisions on the actual numbers. And what it came down to is, sorry for the long story, but I think I've got a good solid 10 minutes before we leave. So they made the determination that they wanted to see if we provide full cost of service, what would the cost of increase be? And that cost of service included a whole bunch of new employees and just a whole bunch of new stuff. They did some like interesting financial juggling where they like took functions into the group, but then they increased the cost of that, but they didn't offset what they used to pay Metro for the allocated resources, because typically, you pay when you use like administration, HR, IT, things like that. So the numbers didn't make sense. Anyway, long story short, Metro came back at a prior meeting and said, okay, we want staff to take a look at full cost of service, 8%. What would it look like if we did the 8% cap and fees, and then kind of, give us a range. And staff came back with a recommendation of just do cost of service 11.92%. And it was their recommendation is either do that or do nothing, and we have to cut services and costs across the board. So we were able to negotiate them coming back. Chair Treese carved out some time. We asked some difficult questions. There were the Metro Council ultimately decided to pause it a week because really the jurisdictions hadn't been able to weigh in on it. And part of the problem, of course, is transparency, and theoretically MPAC should have been part of that conversation and wasn't brought into that loop. So we got to weigh in for a week, and the vote was this morning. I did not get a chance to dial in and watch it, but if I had to guess, and I'm sure somebody knows this, they probably voted it through. So anybody know what the vote was at Metro this morning for the tip fees? Nobody? I have to wait until the minutes come out. Man, I can't imagine. The recommendation that we made via public comment submission was take a pause. You don't need to have this done until the budget cycle, starting in June. So just take a pause, take a look at this, submit feedback from the jurisdictions, and more importantly, staff, come back to Metro Council with the full cost of service and the details on what it pays for, and the 8% predictability fee cap and what that would look like. Because in the documentation they provided to Metro, it showed that the 8% fee cap would actually cover expenses. There'd be a small shortfall paid for from reserve contingency in year 1, but in years 2 through 5, they would actually be better than break even. So again, what that turned into, don't know. So that was a surprisingly significant part of the conversation. We also did get a recap of the legislative update we had before, and that was kind of the same things we've been talking about: the housing budget bill, the omnibus bill, industrial site loan fund was also part of the conversation. We also had an update to our original housing discussion that we had previously, and that was just about the potential for continuing investments that would allow Metro to expand housing options. So, their base scenarios would be, do nothing, issue a new property tax bond similar to the 2018 bond going forward, or expand the allowable uses for the supportive housing services income tax, which actually we got a bit of pushback on that concept ultimately. And then finally, we went back through the latest updated numbers on the regional housing needs assessment, kind of tying that into the decision about whether or not there's an increase in the urban growth boundary. Eco Northwest had come up with a conclusion that there are 30,000 additional homes needed today, and that would be 18,000 homes from underproduction and 12,300 homes for people experiencing houselessness. That was what kind of prompted my comment earlier tonight about the numbers don't jive with what we're seeing from other pieces of documentation. The last numbers we saw were 11,000 people experiencing houselessness, but does that really translate into 12,000 homes? I'm not sure how those numbers, fit together ultimately. But the kind of the discussion really turned into how we assess future demand. And a big part of it was about changing demographics. The idea that, historically, it's always the kind of the concept that every generation should get better over time. We're supposed to deliver a better scenario to our children. And historically, they were able to kind of show, what was the normal split between single family homes, multifamily homes, multi-generational homes, and then what that translates into in today's environment, and what the next generation would potentially look like, with the conclusion that they're drawing kind of being, as demographically people that look like me get older, and the people that are used to having single family homes, that younger generations aren't necessarily looking for that. So we should really focus on our production on middle housing and multifamily more than single family. And, I thought it was an interesting and possibly, having a 30-year-old daughter, possibly a reasonable conclusion. They're looking to be more flexible in their jobs. They're not looking to raise families early on necessarily. As we can see demographically, the US isn't producing as many children as we have been historically. My takeaway from that is always we should be having more sex, but that's a whole different issue. Oh, this is recorded. Excellent. Ultimately, though, I think that the numbers do play right back into what we're looking at right now, which we need to do better housing production. And really the focus does need to be on that kind of middle housing area. But none of that demographic information and none of that housing needs analysis touches on any of how do you do it? It's what do we need? So there you go. It's more than you asked for, but that's what I have for you tonight. Thank you.
Brett, I have a question regarding the solid waste piece. Now that Metro has abandoned the purchase of the Jennifer property, are they looking at other sites for replacement of the South Metro transfer station?
That is an excellent question. So I'm not 100% sure, but the last discussion we had on this, they had taken a pause on that because they were in the process of doing some analysis of kind of they did a survey of their stakeholders to see kind of to take the temperature of, should we keep things the same? Should we expand with a lot of really full service big facilities in distinct locations, or should we do a broader implementation of smaller facilities and have it be more geographically diverse? And the feedback they got resoundingly was the biggest issue for people across the region and the entities that are dropping off waste are proximity. Distance is the biggest issue, and it needs to be more convenient, it needs to be closer. And of course, they'd like to have full service at each of those areas as well. So they kind of took a pause on what they were looking at from a purchase perspective for the time being. And I'm not sure kind of where that is right now in the decision point.
As I recall from the presentation we had some time ago, there was like the Seattle model that had a lot of smaller facilities.
Correct. That's something they were exploring. It's exactly correct. The question that I had on that topic that I don't think I got, there wasn't a lot of information on it that they could provide is, what does that look like financially? As we're looking at raising money for these things, and it's kind of came back with the tip fee as well. So you're looking at raising this money, but how does the decision to change the model change the financing or the financial requirements in that? Because, as a layperson, I would assume that doing a whole lot of little facilities around the region with services is probably going to be more expensive than doing a select group of big facilities that have, full service. So I didn't get an answer on that I can share with you today.
Thank you.
Okay. Last little piece here is any other business. For the first time in many months, and I will thank Paul for starting us promptly and getting us through some things pretty quickly. So we have 8 minutes if we want it. Anybody have any other business or community things that are going on that you want to share? Yes, Trent.
Just very quickly administratively, there will be no C4 meeting in June because we will cancel it to make way for the C4 retreat. The lights have just gone out. The building is telling me it's time to go. And there will also be no meeting in July because that is the 4th of July. And that is a decision of the executive committee, obviously. So that'll be the retreat, and then it will be the August meeting. So for your calendar purposes, wanted to flag those opportunities for you.
What you're saying, Trent, is that we are giving C4 the opportunity of the gift of time to prepare for the retreat in the June meeting, and then for the July time that we would miss would be to ingrain what we learned at the retreat to be able to move forward as a committee, correct?
Marinate. Yeah, marinate.
Perfect. Marinate. There we go. Getting ready for barbecue season. Okay. Any other new business items or community pieces y'all want to throw out there?
I just wanted to sum up and thank Councilor Sherman for his summary of impact on the housing thing. I guess I would sum it up to say that if I heard you correctly, Councilor, if we're more intimate on our housing discussions, we can multiply housing much faster.
I think that is exactly right in a nutshell.
At least the need for Melch.
I think the date of our last meeting was the same date that the county commissioners approved a lot of the funding requests that had come in for some of the supportive housing funds. And I just want to say how grateful I am, and my city is, to the decisions that the commission made and to that whole process of making sure that the state funds that were less restricted went to rural communities that could use them, and that the metro funds that were more restricted went to a variety of projects that were developed at the city level, where we could do what we thought was best for our own cities. Anytime we can do a process that is that effective and is that designed to meet very specific individual needs, I'm all for it. So I don't think that kind of funding is going to come up again, too many times, but it sure worked for us. So I'm grateful to all of you who are a part of that.
Well, thank you. We all appreciate the partnership. So we're all working together on this, and it's teamwork. And I think I was kind of reluctant years back when we started having housing discussions, because we never really did that here at C4, but I would say that we helped that conversation along. So we are a big part of just what you spoke to, Mayor Milch. So thank you for recognizing that.
All right, well, that leaves in terms of the gift of time. So I will adjourn our meeting unless there is any further wishes to continue. Great, seeing none. Everyone have a great May, and we'll see everyone at the retreat here in June. Have a great evening and month, everyone.
Thank you.